In a city where billionaires rule the skyline and secrets hide in the shadows, Arthur Sterling was the last man anyone expected to break. But on the night a quiet betrayal shattered his certainty. He found himself standing in an empty office, lost, vulnerable, and forced to face the echo of his own loneliness. And that's when he heard her. A simple cleaning woman working past midnight, unaware that her presence would become the spark that unraveled an entire empire. One fragile moment of human connection, just a glance, a word, a shared silence, set off a chain of events that would challenge a dynasty, expose a lie buried deep within a billion-dollar legacy, and push two lives from opposite worlds toward a collision no one could have predicted. In a city of 10 million stories, some begin not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a vacuum cleaner in the dead of night. High above the glittering skyline, on the 80th floor of a tower that pierced the clouds, a single light burned in the office of Arthur Sterling. He was a man forged from the steel and glass of his surroundings, the solitary CEO of a family empire whose net worth was a number so vast it had lost all meaning. His world was one of stocks and bonds, of multi-million-dollar deals closed with a clipped signature, of a fortune built on the cold, hard logic of the stock market. He was the guardian of a formidable inheritance, a legacy of wealth that stretched back generations, and the weight of it had compressed his soul into something dense and unyielding. Tonight, however, a crack had appeared in the fortress. A brutal corporate betrayal, orchestrated by a man he'd considered a friend, had left him reeling. The carefully constructed walls of his life felt paper-thin, and for the first time in years, Arthur felt the biting chill of vulnerability. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, not seeing the city lights, but the reflection of a man he barely recognized, a man whose entire life was a series of calculated risks and strategic business moves, yet who now felt utterly lost. The empire was safe, the capital was secure, but the man himself was adrift. It was in this moment of profound silence that he heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound that cut through the sterile quiet of his office. He turned to see a woman from the late-night cleaning crew, her back to him, methodically polishing the long mahogany conference table. Her name was Elena, though he didn't know it then. To him, she was just a part of the building's invisible machinery, one of the many people who moved through his world without ever truly entering it. But tonight, something was different. He watched her work. Her movements efficient and graceful, a quiet dignity in the simple, repetitive task. She wasn't rushing, she was restoring order, bringing a small piece of the world back into balance. He had never spoken to a member of the cleaning staff before. They were ghosts who appeared after the last executive had left and vanished before the first arrived. But the loneliness in the room was a physical presence, a suffocating force, and on an impulse he couldn't explain, he spoke. "Do you work late?" he said, his voice sounding rusty and foreign in the quiet space. Elena startled slightly, turning to face him. She had kind, weary eyes that held no judgment, only a flicker of surprise. "The city never sleeps, sir. Neither does the dust." A small, simple smile touched her lips, and in that instant, the chasm between their worlds seemed to shrink. It wasn't the witty retort of a socialite or the deferential murmur of an employee. It was just human. He found himself walking towards her, away from the window and the ghost of his own reflection. They talked. It wasn't about profits or dividends or the complex world of finance that consumed his every waking thought. He asked about her, and she answered with a simple honesty that was as refreshing as it was disarming. She spoke of her small apartment, of a sister she was helping through college, of her dream to one day open a small flower shop. She didn't ask about his business or his money. She asked if he had eaten, gesturing to the untouched plate of expensive food a caterer had left hours ago. For the first time all day, Arthur felt seen not as a billionaire CEO, but simply as a man. Her quiet strength and simple kindness were a balm to his wounded pride. She listened as he spoke vaguely of his bad day, her presence a steady anchor in his swirling turmoil. In that sterile, moonlit office, surrounded by the trappings of unimaginable wealth, the abstract art, the rare books, the panoramic view of a kingdom he commanded, two people from different universes found a shared moment of humanity. The decision that followed defied all logic, all the rules of his structured, isolated life. It was a fleeting, desperate reach for connection, a rebellion against the crushing loneliness that his vast fortune could never fill. They spent the night together, a quiet intersection of two lives that were never meant to cross. It was a single, fragile thread of intimacy in a world that had offered him none. As the first blush of dawn painted the sky, they parted with a quiet awkwardness, the spell broken by the encroaching reality of the day. He had a board meeting about a new investment fund. She had to catch the first bus home. It was a moment out of time, an anomaly they would both try to forget. But some moments refused to be buried. That single night, born of weakness and a shared, silent understanding, had set in motion a chain of events that would not just change his life, but threatened to shatter it completely. For Arthur, the days that followed were a return to form. The betrayal that had shaken him was swiftly managed, a calculated loss absorbed into the vast portfolio of his family's assets. He immersed himself back into the familiar currents of high-stakes finance, a world where human emotion was a liability and success was measured in quarterly earnings and market share. The night with the cleaning lady became a footnote, a strange and unsettling deviation from the script of his life, which he filed away and tried to ignore. His fiancée, Beatrice Vancroft, a woman as polished and valuable as a rare diamond, re-entered the picture, her presence a constant reminder of the strategic alliance their marriage represented. Their union wasn't just a personal commitment, it was a merger of two powerful dynasties, a business deal that would consolidate their family fortunes and create an untouchable empire. For Elena, life did not simply return to normal, it had been irrevocably altered. The memory of that night was not a footnote, but a chapter she couldn't stop rereading. It was the warmth of a genuine conversation, the startling vulnerability in the eyes of a man who commanded the world, a brief, impossible connection that made her own lonely existence feel a little less so. She continued her work, scrubbing the floors of the wealthy, her hands raw, her body tired, but her mind was elsewhere. Then, weeks later, the persistent fatigue and a subtle change she couldn't ignore led her to a small, free clinic. The doctor's words were quiet. Clinical G, but they landed with the force of an earthquake. She was pregnant. Panic was her first instinct, a cold, suffocating wave. She was alone, earning barely enough to support herself, let alone a child. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. A fierce, primal protectiveness. This wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a life that deserved more than she could give it alone. She thought of Arthur, not of his money, his staggering wealth, or the billions of dollars in his name, but of the man she had met in that silent office, the man who had looked so lost. He had a right to know. Her child had a right to its father. Driven by a powerful sense of duty that overshadowed her fear, she made a decision. She would tell him. Summoning all her courage, she returned to the Sterling Tower, not as an invisible member of the night crew, but as a visitor in the harsh light of day. The lobby, a cathedral of marble and glass, felt even more intimidating now. As she approached the reception desk, her voice trembling slightly as she asked for Mr. Sterling, a cool, melodic voice cut through the air. "Can I help you?" Elena turned to see a woman who seemed to have stepped out of a magazine. Beatrice Vancroft stood before her, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Elena earned in a year. Her smile was perfect, but it didn't reach her eyes. which scanned Elena with the detached appraisal of a jeweler examining a flawed stone. I need to speak with Mr. Sterling. It's personal, Elena managed. Beatrice's smile tightened. Arthur is a very busy man. His time is a valuable commodity. Perhaps you can tell me what this is about, and I can see if it warrants his attention. In that moment, Elena knew she would never get past this woman. Taking a deep breath, she decided on the direct truth. I believe I am carrying his child. The mask of polite indifference on Beatrice's face didn't slip, but a flicker of ice hardened her gaze. She guided Elena to a secluded alcove, away from prying ears. I see, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Listen, these things happen. Arthur is a very generous man, a philanthropist even. He wouldn't want to see you struggle. She opened her designer handbag and pulled out a checkbook. I am prepared to offer you a sum, a gift, to help you get back on your feet and take care of your situation. Let's say $10,000, a fresh start. Elena stared at the checkbook, then back at Beatrice. The offer was a slap in the face, a dismissal of her and her unborn child as a minor inconvenience to be paid off. It's not about money, Elena said, her voice finding a new strength. I don't want his fortune. I just think he deserves to know he's going to be a father. Beatrice's expression finally cracked, replaced by a look of utter contempt. You naive little fool, she hissed. You think this is a fairy tale. You are a threat to my future, to our family's reputation, to a legacy of wealth you can't even comprehend. You will take the money and you will disappear. No, Elena said, her resolve hardening into steel. I won't. The next day, when Elena arrived for her shift, her supervisor called her into the office. On the table was a small, ornate silver box, an item she had never seen before. Her supervisor, avoiding her eyes, told her it had been found in her cleaning cart. It was a priceless antique belonging to Ms. Vancroft, reported missing from her office. Eleanor was fired on the spot for theft. Security guards, men whose friendly greetings she had come to expect, escorted her from the building like a common criminal. The doors of the Sterling Tower slid shut behind her, sealing her out of the world she had so briefly touched. She stood on the pavement, jobless, her reputation ruined, and the weight of the new life inside her feeling heavier than ever. The walls were closing in, and she was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Desperation is a quiet, creeping thing. It doesn't announce itself with a shout, but with the silence of a phone that never rings, the stark reality of a near-empty refrigerator, and the cold dread that settles in your stomach in the pre-dawn hours. For Elena, her small apartment, once a cozy sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Every creak of the floorboards, every siren in the distance amplified her isolation. The accusation of theft had blacklisted her. Every job application she submitted was met with a polite but firm rejection, the unspoken reason hanging heavy in the air. Her meager savings, carefully set aside from years of hard work, were evaporating like mist. Soon, she wouldn't be able to afford rent, let alone the mounting costs of bringing a new life into the world. One evening, as she was sorting her laundry, her fingers brushed against something hard and metallic in the pocket of the uniform she'd worn on that fateful night. She pulled it out. Lying in her palm was a single cufflink, a small, elegant disc of platinum with a sapphire embedded in the center, forming a unique, stylized SE. It was Arthur's. He must have lost it, and it had been swept up with her things. For days, she just looked at it. It was a tangible piece of that night, a solid proof that she wasn't delusional, that their connection, however brief, had been real. It was also her last resort. With trembling hands and a heart pounding with a mixture of hope and terror, she wrapped the cufflink in a small piece of cloth, placed it in a padded envelope, and wrote a simple, heartfelt letter. She didn't ask for money or threaten him. She simply explained what had happened with his fiancée, that she had lost her job, and that she was carrying his child. She included the cufflink as proof that she was telling the truth, a silent testament to their shared moment. She addressed it to Arthur Sterling's private residence, a palatial estate she found the address for online, praying it would reach his hands and his hands alone. But the Sterling estate was not a home. It was a fortress, guarded by a dragon more formidable than any security system. Her name was Eleanor Sterling, Arthur's mother and the matriarch of the family. A woman whose veins seemed to run with ice water. Eleanor's singular purpose in life was the preservation of the family's pristine public image and the astronomical wealth it protected. She viewed the world as a series of potential threats to their vast patrimonio, a collection of assets so immense it rivaled the GDP of small countries. All of Arthur's personal mail was screened by her personal assistant, and the small, unassuming padded envelope was flagged immediately. Inside her lavishly decorated sitting room, surrounded by priceless art and antiques, Eleanor opened the package. She read the letter, her expression unreadable, and then examined the cufflink. She recognized it instantly. It was part of a set she had commissioned for Arthur's 30th birthday. A cold, calculated fury settled over her. She picked up the phone and made a single call. "Beatrice," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "We have a problem. Come over at once." When Arthur returned home that evening, he walked into an ambush. His mother and Beatrice were waiting for him in the library, the letter and the cufflink laid out on the polished oak table like evidence at a crime scene. "This arrived for you today," Eleanor began, her tone dripping with disappointment. Beatrice played her part perfectly, her eyes welling with crocodile tears. "Arthur, darling, I tried to handle this discreetly. I offered the girl money, a generous amount to help her, but she refused. She's clearly after something more." His mother took over, her voice sharp and cutting. "This is a classic shakedown, Arthur, a calculated attack on our family, on our name. This girl is a parasite trying to attach herself to our fortune. She invents a story, provides a stolen trinket as proof, and hopes for a massive payout to go away. We've seen this 100 times. Arthur looked at the cufflink, a knot tightening in his stomach. He remembered the woman, her kind eyes, their quiet conversation. Nothing about her seemed predatory or calculating, but his mother's words were a powerful poison, cultivated over a lifetime of obedience. She spoke of legacy, of duty, of the family's herança that he was sworn to protect. She reminded him of the potential scandal, the damage to their business, the public humiliation. "I don't know," he started, his voice barely a whisper. "She didn't seem like—" "Of course she didn't," Eleanor snapped. "That's how they operate. They prey on the decency of men like you. You cannot engage with her. You will let the family's legal team handle this. They will make it go away, quietly and efficiently." Torn between a faint, nagging memory of genuine connection and the overwhelming weight of his family's expectations, Arthur relented. He buried his doubt, choosing the familiar path of loyalty. He nodded, gave his mother the permission she sought, and walked away, trying to convince himself he was doing the right thing. A week later, a courier delivered a thick envelope to Elena's door. Her hands shook as she opened it. It wasn't a letter from Arthur. It was a brutal legal document from a top-tier law firm. In cold, intimidating language, it accused her of harassment and attempted extortion. It demanded she sign a non-disclosure agreement, surrendering all rights to ever contact Arthur Sterling or his family again. In exchange for her eternal silence, they offered a one-time payment of $25,000, an amount that was both an insult and a threat, a sum designed to show her exactly what her silence, her dignity, and her child's future were worth to them. The words blurred through her tears. The injustice of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. They hadn't just fired her, they were trying to erase her. Just as the last flicker of hope was about to be extinguished, she remembered something, rummaging through an old box of keepsakes. Her fingers closed around a worn business card. It belonged to a lawyer, a young man named David Chen. Years ago, he had dropped his wallet outside the Sterling Tower, and she had found it and returned it to him, refusing any reward. He had thanked her profusely, a young, earnest lawyer just starting out, and insisted she take his card. "If you ever need anything," he had said, "anything at all, please call, pro bono." At the time, she had smiled and tucked it away, never imagining she would need it. Now, that worn piece of cardstock felt like the only lifeline in a raging sea. The next morning, with a resolve she didn't know she possessed, Elena dialed the number. A friendly voice answered, and she asked for David Chen, her own voice barely a whisper. When he came on the line, she explained who she was, her words tumbling out in a nervous rush, expecting him to barely remember the brief encounter from years ago. But he did. "The woman with the honest eyes," he said, a warmth in his voice that instantly calmed her. "Of course I remember. You saved me a world of trouble that day. You said you needed help." She met him at his office, a space that couldn't have been more different from the world of Arthur Sterling. It was a small, cluttered room above a bustling street market, smelling of old books and fresh coffee. Stacks of files teetered on every surface, each one representing a person without the vast fortune or capital to fight their own battles. David Chen was just as she remembered, sharp, attentive, with a fire in his eyes that spoke of a deep-seated belief in justice. He listened intently as she told him everything, his expression shifting from sympathy to a quiet, focused anger as she detailed the false accusation, the dismissal, and the intimidating legal notice. She handed him the thick envelope from the Sterling family's lawyers. He read through the document, his jaw tightening. "This is designed to break you," he said, his voice low. "It's a battering ram made of paper. They're counting on you being too scared and too poor to fight back." He looked up, his gaze meeting hers directly. "They're wrong." And so began a grueling David and Goliath legal battle. The Sterling family's law firm, a behemoth with floors of lawyers billing thousands of dollars an hour, unleashed its full arsenal. They filed motion after motion, burying David's small office in an avalanche of paperwork. They requested every document imaginable from Elena's life, old pay stubs, rental agreements, phone records, anything to build a narrative that she was an unstable, opportunistic grifter. It was a war of attrition, a strategy designed not to win on merit, but to exhaust and bankrupt their opponent. Every week, a new, thicker envelope would arrive, each one a fresh assault on her peace of mind. The legal jargon was a language of its own, cold and weaponized, and the sheer volume of it was suffocating. Meanwhile, the life inside her grew. Her body was changing, the morning sickness giving way to a constant, weary ache in her back. The stress of the legal fight began to take a physical toll. There were nights she would lie awake, one hand on her swelling belly, the other clutching the latest legal threat, her heart pounding with a fear so profound it felt like a physical weight on her chest. She wasn't just fighting for her reputation anymore. She was fighting for her child's future, for the right to not be erased. David was her rock through it all. He worked tirelessly, often late into the night, poring over the Sterling's filings, finding loopholes and crafting responses with the precision of a surgeon. He believed in her, and his belief became a shield against the crushing weight of the Sterling Empire. But he was honest about their chances. "Elena," he told her one evening, his face etched with fatigue, "they're trying to bleed us dry in time and spirit. Their primary asset isn't the law. It's their endless supply of money. They can drag this out for years, hoping we'll just give up." But as she felt a gentle flutter from within her womb, Eleanor knew that giving up was not an option. The stakes were higher than any fortune, greater than any business, and more precious than all the gold in the Sterling family vault. The turning point arrived on a cold Tuesday morning in a deposition room that felt as sterile and unforgiving as a morgue. The air was thick with the scent of expensive leather and ambition. Elena sat beside David, her hands clasped protectively over her growing belly, a silent testament to the truth of her claim. Across the long, polished table sat Beatrice Vancroft, flanked by a team of 3 lawyers from the Sterling family's firm. Beatrice looked flawless, a vision of cool confidence in a navy blue suit, her expression one of bored condescension. She was here to perjure herself, to methodically dismantle Elena's character and bury her claim under a mountain of elegant lies. Under oath, Beatrice was a masterful performer. She recounted a completely fabricated version of the night in question. "And Arthur and I were dining at Le Ciel," she stated, her voice smooth and unwavering. "We had a late dinner to celebrate closing a new investment deal. We were together the entire evening until well after midnight." She smiled faintly, a private, knowing look directed at her lawyers. "It was a lovely, intimate evening. This woman's story is a work of fiction, a desperate attempt to attach herself to a fortune she feels entitled to." She described Eleanor as a disgruntled employee, hinting at a history of instability, painting a picture of a calculated scheme to extort a high-profile billionario. Every word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall of deceit around Arthur, sealing Elena out. Elena listened, her heart sinking with each lie. It was her word against the fiancé of one of the richest men in the country. A woman whose entire life was a testament to the power and credibility that immense wealth can buy. David let her speak, his pen scratching quietly on a legal pad. He remained calm, allowing Beatrice to weave her narrative, to become comfortable and overconfident in her falsehoods. When it was his turn to question her, his approach was gentle, almost deferential. He asked her to confirm the details again. The time they arrived at the restaurant, what they ate, the exact time Arthur dropped her off at her penthouse. Beatrice answered with practiced ease, her story seamless. She was enjoying this, the act of publicly crushing this insignificant woman who dared to threaten her future. "Ms. Vancroft," David said, his tone still mild, "you are absolutely certain Mr. Sterling was with you, and only you, from approximately 7 p.m. until after midnight on the night of October 14th. "I am under oath, Mr. Chen," Beatrice replied with a condescending smile. "Yes, I am absolutely certain." "Thank you," David said, standing up. He walked to his briefcase and pulled out a large manila envelope. "I'd like to enter into evidence Exhibit A." He placed a glossy 8x10 photograph in the center of the table. The Sterling lawyers leaned in, their expressions shifting from confidence to confusion, then to alarm. Beatrice's smile vanished. The photograph was a time-stamped security still from the main lobby of the Sterling Tower. The date was October 14th. The time was 11:52 p.m., and the image was perfectly, damningly clear. Arthur Sterling, his tie loosened, standing beside Elena, his hand lightly touching her arm as they spoke. They were alone, captured in a moment of quiet intimacy that no lie could erase. A collective gasp seemed to be sucked from the room. Beatrice stared at the photo, her face draining of all color. Her perfect alibi, her entire testimony, had been shattered by a single, undeniable piece of evidence. The wall of deceit she had so carefully constructed had just been bulldozed. Her lawyer frantically whispered in her ear, but she didn't seem to hear him. She was trapped. For Elena, it was as if she could breathe again for the first time in months. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of profound, overwhelming relief. It was the truth, captured in black and white. David Chen hadn't just found a piece of evidence, he had found her voice. Though Arthur wasn't in the room, the transcript of the deposition landed on his desk the next morning. He read Beatrice's confident, detailed lies, and then he saw the description of Exhibit A. He stared at the words for a long time, the image of the photograph burning in his mind. He remembered that moment in the lobby, the quiet conversation. The weary kindness in Elena's eyes. His mother had called her a parasite. Beatrice had called her a liar, but the photograph told a different story. For the first time, a serious, corrosive seed of doubt began to sprout in the carefully manicured garden of his life. He looked at the legal file on his desk, the one meant to crush Elena, and felt a sickening lurch in his stomach. He was protecting his family's legacy, their herança. But what if that legacy was built on a foundation of lies? He began to suspect that the capital he was defending was not just financial, but a capital of deceit. The scent of betrayal was in the air again, but this time it wasn't coming from a business rival. It was coming from inside his own home, haunted by the image of that photograph. Arthur felt the polished, orderly world he inhabited begin to fracture. The doubt was no longer a seed, it was a thorny vine, wrapping around his heart, squeezing the air from his lungs. He could no longer delegate this. He couldn't trust his mother's lawyers or Beatrice's tearful explanations. He needed the truth, raw and unfiltered, and he knew he had to find it himself. His first move was to investigate the theft. He bypassed his own company's security chief, a man loyal to his mother, and instead hired a discreet private investigator, a former detective with a reputation for finding secrets buried deep beneath layers of wealth and power. The objective was simple: find out everything about Elena's dismissal. The investigator was good. Within 48 hours, he had a name: Frank Miller, the security guard on duty the night the silver box was supposedly stolen. Miller had been abruptly transferred to a remote warehouse facility owned by the Sterling Corporation a week after the incident, a move that reeked of a hush payment disguised as a promotion. While Arthur hunted for the truth, the stress of the legal war was waging a silent, brutal campaign on Elena's body. The constant fear, the sleepless nights, and the struggle to afford nutritious food were taking their toll. One afternoon, a sharp, crippling pain shot through her abdomen, so intense it brought her to her knees. Terrified, she managed to call David, who rushed her to the emergency room of a public hospital. The hours that followed were a blur of worried faces, sterile white rooms, and the rhythmic beep of machines. The doctor, a kind but direct woman, finally sat by her bedside. "Ms. Rojas," she said gently, "the stress you're under is causing severe complications. Your blood pressure is dangerously high. We're seeing signs of preterm labor. You need to be on complete bed rest. If we can't get this under control, the health of both you and your baby will be in serious jeopardy." The words hung in the air, a death sentence to her fight. Bed rest. How could she afford to stop working the odd jobs she'd managed to find? How could she fight a legal battle from a hospital bed? The life she was fighting for was now the very thing being threatened by the fight itself. The stakes were no longer about justice, they were about survival. Arthur found Frank Miller during his lunch break, sitting on a concrete barrier outside the dusty warehouse. He was an older man, with tired eyes that had seen too much. Arthur approached him not as a billionaire CEO, but as a man seeking an answer. He didn't threaten. He offered protection. He showed Frank the photograph from the deposition. "I know she was with me that night," Arthur said, his voice low and steady. "And I know she's not a thief. I just want to know what really happened." Frank stared at the picture, then at the ground, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The guilt he had been carrying was a heavy burden. "Miss Vancroft, she came to me a few days after," he confessed, his voice thick with shame. "She said the girl was a problem. She offered me money, enough to pay for my wife's medical bills. She said it was a small thing, just to misplace a report, to say I saw something I didn't. She planted the box herself. I never thought. I just needed the money." The confession was a clean shot, piercing through the last of Arthur's denial. It wasn't just a lie. It was a cruel, calculated act of destruction against an innocent woman. He had allowed this to happen. His willful blindness had made him complicit. Armed with this devastating truth, he drove back to the family estate, a cold, righteous fury building within him. He found his mother and Beatrice in the drawing room, planning the wedding, discussing floral arrangements, as if the world was still perfectly in order. He placed a small audio recorder on the marble table between them. "I spoke to Frank Miller," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. He pressed play. Frank's guilt-ridden confession filled the opulent room, each word an indictment. Beatrice went pale, her mask of composure shattering into a million pieces. His mother, however, remained unnervingly calm. "You fool," she said, her voice like chipping ice. "You think this is about one little cleaning girl? This is about protecting a billion-dollar legacy, the fortune your grandfather built from nothing. By destroying innocent people," Arthur shot back, his voice rising, "by framing them for crimes they didn't commit." "Yes," Eleanor declared, standing up, her eyes blazing with a fanatic's fire. "If necessary, you are a sterling. You do what is required to protect the family's assets, to secure our position. Do you have any idea what your father almost did to us?" She pointed to a stoic portrait of his father above the fireplace. "Years ago, before you were old enough to understand, another woman came forward. A secretary. She was pregnant. Your father, in a moment of weakness, was prepared to acknowledge the child. It would have caused a scandal that would have shattered our stock prices and cost us half our fortune in a divorce. I handled it. I made her disappear. I protected this family then, and I am protecting it now. That is the burden of this wealth, Arthur. It is a capital that must be defended at all costs." The revelation struck Arthur with the force of a physical blow. His entire life, his father had been held up as a paragon of integrity. This hidden history, this toxic secret festering at the heart of their family, explained everything. His mother's obsession, her ruthlessness, the cold, transactional nature of their lives. He wasn't just the heir to a great fortune, he was the heir to a legacy of lies. As the weight of this new reality crashed down on him, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. It was David Chen. He answered, his hand trembling. "Arthur," David's voice was urgent, strained. "It's Elena. She's at the hospital. The baby is coming now, far too early. The doctors, they're not sure they can save them both." The words struck Arthur with the force of a physical impact, silencing the enraged voices of his mother and fiancé. In that instant, the opulent drawing room, with its priceless art and suffocating history, ceased to exist. The billion-dollar fortune, the carefully guarded family name, the entire edifice of wealth and power he had been conditioned to protect, it all crumbled to dust. All that remained was the stark, terrifying reality of David Chen's voice on the phone. A woman and a child, his child, were fighting for their lives, and he was standing here arguing about a legacy built on lies. He looked at his mother, her face a mask of cold fury, and at Beatrice, whose panic was not for a human life, but for the impending collapse of her social and financial ambitions. He saw them for what they were, not protectors of a legacy, but jailers of his soul. A lifetime of obedience, of filial duty drilled into his very bones, snapped. Without another word, he turned and sprinted from the room, leaving their shocked shouts echoing behind him. He ignored the butler who tried to open the door for him, bursting out into the cold night air. The engine of his supercar roared to life, a guttural cry of rebellion. As he peeled out of the long, manicured driveway, his phone began to buzz incessantly on the passenger seat. His mother, Beatrice, the family's chief counsel. Each call was another chain he was determined to break. He let it ring, the sound of frantic, impotent protest against his escape. The drive to the hospital was a high-speed blur of streaking lights and screeching tires. He pushed the car to its limits, the city flashing past his windows like a surreal dream. For the first time, he wasn't driving towards a business deal or a corporate merger. He was driving towards something real, something that mattered more than all the stocks, bonds, and bitcoins in his family's vast portfolio. He was driving towards the consequences of his own weakness and the desperate, terrifying hope of redemption. He stormed into the public hospital's emergency entrance, a man whose tailored suit was a stark contrast to the organized chaos around him. This was a world away from the silent, discreet private clinics the Sterlings frequented. This was a place of raw, unfiltered life and death, and it felt more real than any boardroom he had ever entered. After a frantic inquiry, a weary-looking nurse directed him to the maternity ward. He found the neonatal intensive care unit, a quiet, dimly lit room filled with the soft, rhythmic beeping of monitors. A nurse pointed him towards a small incubator in the corner. He approached it slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs, and then he saw him, his son, a life so tiny, so fragile, it seemed impossible. Wires and tubes, looking monstrously large against the baby's delicate skin, connected him to the machines that were keeping him alive. In that moment, watching his son's tiny chest struggle for each breath, the full, crushing weight of his actions fell upon Arthur. This fragile life was the result of his one moment of genuine connection, and its peril was the result of his months of cowardice. The family fortune, the herança he had been protecting, felt like a pile of worthless ash. A voice, sharp and unwelcome, cut through his reverie. "Arthur, what are you doing?" He turned. His mother and Beatrice stood at the entrance of the NICU, their faces etched with disapproval and annoyance. They looked absurdly out of place. Two vultures in a sanctuary. "We need to handle this now," his mother said, her voice a low, urgent hiss. "I'll have our people arrange a transfer to a private facility. We can contain this situation." "Manage the narrative," Beatrice stepped forward, attempting a soft, placating tone. "Darling, it's not too late. We can still fix this. This complication doesn't have to ruin everything we've built." Arthur stared at them as if seeing them for the first time. They weren't talking about his son's life. They were talking about a complication, a situation to be managed, a potential liability to their assets. He felt a profound, cleansing calm settle over him. The man they were speaking to, the obedient son and strategic partner, was gone. He had died somewhere on the frantic drive to this hospital. He walked over to them, forcing them back into the sterile corridor. "Beatrice," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the unshakable finality of a judge's gavel. "We are finished. The engagement is off. The merger is off. Everything is off." He then turned to his mother, the architect of his gilded cage. "And you," he said, the words costing him everything and yet freeing him completely. "You can keep your fortune. You can keep the capital, the stocks, the name. I want no part of it. I renounce it all." His mother's face contorted with disbelief, then rage. "You would throw away $1 billion inheritance for this?" she spat, gesturing dismissively towards the NICU. "It's not a this," Arthur replied, his voice finally his own. "He is my son, and that is a patrimonio worth more than you could ever understand." He turned his back on their sputtering threats and desperate pleas and walked back towards the glass incubator, towards the only thing in the world that now mattered. He had sacrificed his wealth, his family, and his entire past. In return, he had just gained a future. The sterile silence of the hospital corridor was a world away from the echoing rage he had left behind in his mother's drawing room. He had walked away from a kingdom, from a fortune so vast it could bend the will of governments, from a legacy etched in gold and stone. Now, all he had was the squeak of his expensive shoes on the linoleum floor and a profound, terrifying sense of freedom. He asked a nurse for Elena's room, and she pointed him down a hallway. He found the door and hesitated, his hand hovering over the handle. What could he possibly say? How could he apologize for a wound so deep? For an injustice so cruel. He pushed the door open gently. Elena was lying in the bed, pale and exhausted, an IV drip attached to her arm. Her eyes were closed, but they fluttered open as he stepped inside. For a moment, she just stared at him, her expression a mixture of fear, confusion, and utter weariness. The last time she had seen him, he was an almost mythical figure in a moonlit office. Now, he was the man whose family had tried to destroy her. "Elena," he began, his voice raspy, unfamiliar even to himself. The words caught in his throat. All the powerful, persuasive language he used to command boardrooms and negotiate multi-billion-dollar deals was useless here. He was stripped of his armor, of his capital of confidence. He took a step closer. "I am so sorry," he finally managed, the words feeling pitifully inadequate. "For everything, for my weakness, my blindness, for what they did to you. What I allowed them to do." Eleanor watched him, her gaze unwavering. She didn't speak, didn't offer him the comfort of an immediate response. She simply listened, forcing him to stand in the uncomfortable silence of his own making. "I didn't know the extent of it until today," he continued, the confession tumbling out. "The theft, the lies. I was a coward. I listened to them instead of listening to my own memory of you. There is no excuse." He took a deep breath. "I've left them. The company, the money, the inheritance, all of it. It's over." Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of disbelief. "You... what?" "I've renounced my position, my claim to the sterling fortune," he said. "It's a toxic legacy, built on a foundation of cruelty. I want no part of it. My lawyers are already drafting the documents to make it official." This was the last thing she had expected. She had steeled herself for another battle. Another threat, another insulting offer delivered in dollars or euros. But this was surrender. It was abdication. Just then, David Chen walked in, a file in his hand. He stopped short upon seeing Arthur, his body tensing, ready to defend his client. "It's all right, David," Elena said, her voice weak but clear. Arthur turned to the young lawyer who had fought so bravely against his family's behemoth firm. "Mr. Chen," Arthur said, extending a hand, "and I owe you a debt I can never repay. Thank you for believing in her when I failed to." David hesitated, then shook his hand, his expression softening from suspicion to cautious understanding. "I just got off the phone with your personal attorney," David said, looking at Arthur. "He confirmed it. You're severing all ties, relinquishing all assets tied to the family trust." The confirmation hung in the air, a fact as solid and real as the hospital bed between them. It wasn't just a promise, it was an action already in motion. The days that followed blurred into a new, strange reality. Arthur never left the hospital. He traded his penthouse for a lumpy visitor's chair that folded out into a cot. He learned the names of the night nurses, the rhythm of the monitors, the subtle changes in his son's breathing. He ate gelatin from the hospital cafeteria and drank lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup. And it felt more nourishing than any five-star meal he'd ever had. His phone buzzed with frantic messages from the world he had abandoned. News outlets were reporting on the sudden, shocking split between the Sterling and Vancroft dynasties. Financial analysts speculated on the instability it would cause for Sterling Industries, their stock taking a noticeable hit on the Bolsa de Valores. He ignored it all. His entire world had shrunk to this small hospital room and the NICU down the hall. His only investment now was in the fragile life in that incubator. All the theories about maximizing profit and diversifying assets seemed absurd. The only dividend he cared about was his son's next breath. Elena watched him, her guard slowly, cautiously, beginning to lower. She saw him talking for hours with the neonatologist, asking intelligent, desperate questions. She saw him fall asleep in the chair, his designer suit rumpled, a book on premature infant care fallen on his lap. He wasn't trying to buy his way back into her good graces with his immense wealth. He was trying to earn it with his presence. One afternoon, as she was strong enough to be wheeled down to the NICU, she saw him standing over their son's incubator, his hand pressed against the glass, whispering promises to the tiny child inside. He didn't know she was there. In that unguarded moment, she saw not a billionario, but a father, a terrified, hopeful, broken man trying to piece his life back together in the only way that mattered. The road ahead was uncertain, a path stripped of the golden safety net he had always known. The immense patrimonio liquido he once commanded was gone. But as he sat beside Elena, sharing a quiet, simple meal from a plastic tray, he felt a different kind of richness, one that couldn't be measured in stocks or bitcoins. It was the hard-won peace of doing the right thing, a quiet redemption taking root in the sterile, hopeful environment of a hospital, proving that the most valuable things in life are never listed on any market. Weeks later, their son, whom they named Leo, was finally strong enough to leave the incubator. The first time Arthur held him, without the barrier of glass and wires, the sensation was overwhelming. Leo's tiny fingers wrapped around his own, a grip so fragile, yet so powerful, it felt like it was anchoring his very soul. He looked up at Elena, who was watching them with tears in her eyes. And in that shared glance, a new family was forged, not from a contract or a merger, but from shared vulnerability and a fierce, protective love. The day they left the hospital was both terrifying and exhilarating. Arthur had sold his last remaining personal assets, not tied to the family trust, a vintage watch collection, his sports car, some personal stock holdings, to secure a small, clean apartment in a quiet neighborhood and to pay off the mountain of medical bills. It was a world away from the palatial estate he had grown up in, but walking through the door with Elena and carrying his son in his arms, it felt more like a home than that cold museum ever had. Their new life was a tapestry of simple, profound moments. Arthur, the man who once commanded a boardroom with a single glance, now struggled to master the art of swaddling. The multimillionario who could analyze complex market trends found himself completely mesmerized by the simple gurgle of his son. He discovered a joy in the mundane, late-night feedings, the smell of baby powder, the quiet hum of a lullaby. He and Elena built their relationship slowly, cautiously, on a foundation of shared experience rather than fleeting passion. They learned about each other's dreams and fears over lukewarm coffee during Leo's naps. They didn't have immense wealth or a portfolio of investments. Their only assets were trust and time. About a year later, as Leo was taking his first wobbly steps in their small living room, the past made one final desperate attempt to reclaim its hold. A sleek black car, impossibly out of place on their modest street, pulled up to the curb. Eleanor Sterling and Beatrice Vancroft emerged, their designer clothes and cold expressions as alien as a spaceship landing in a public park. Arthur met them at the door, his body instinctively shielding the life he had built inside. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice calm, devoid of the anger or fear they once inspired in him. "We came to make a final offer," Eleanor said, her eyes sweeping over the humble apartment with undisguised disdain. "It's a disgrace, Arthur. Living like this, I've set up a trust fund for the child, $10 million. All you have to do is sign these papers which legally distance you from him and come home. Resume your rightful place." Beatrice stepped forward, a strained, rehearsed smile on her face. "The scandal has died down, Arthur. We can rebuild. We can say you were temporarily unwell. People will forget." Arthur almost laughed. They still didn't understand. They saw life as a series of transactions, of profits and losses, of narratives to be managed. They couldn't comprehend a value that wasn't listed on the stock exchange. He stepped aside from the doorway. "Come in," he said. They entered cautiously, their eyes falling on Elena, who was holding Leo's hands as he stood, a proud, happy smile on her face. She looked at the two women who had tried to erase her, not with hatred, but with a quiet, unshakable dignity. Eleanor Beatrice, Arthur said, his voice ringing with a clarity he had never possessed before. I want you to meet my family. This is Eleanor, the strongest person I have ever known. And this is my son, Leo. He walked over and scooped Leo into his arms, the child babbling happily. This is my fortune, this is my legacy, this is my entire patrimonio liquido. It's not for sale, not for 10 million, not for 10 billion. There is no amount of dollars or euros you could offer. My dividend is his laughter. My only business is his future. The two women stared, finally understanding that the man they had controlled for so long was truly gone. In his place stood a father and a partner, a man whose wealth was not in his bank account, but in his heart. Defeated, they turned and left without another word, their world of cold, hard capital unable to make a dent in a fortress built of love. Arthur closed the door, shutting out the past for good. He looked at Elena, at their son, and at the sun-drenched room that was their home. He had lost an empire of gold, but had gained a universe of light. His life was no longer about accumulating a greater fortune, but about appreciating the simple, priceless treasure he now held in his arms. He had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true redemption isn't found in regaining what you've lost, but in having the courage to build something real and true from the ashes. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of what truly matters, please show your support by giving this video a like. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the incredible power of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.